The Farm Bill authorizes a program called the Value-Added Producer Grants. They've been doing this since 2001 and appropriated money in different years. We're going to talk a bit about that program real quick and some highlights from a recent piece of research done at the University of Minnesota by Edward Blevins and his MS thesis, of which I was a supervisor. The purpose of this program is to try to add farmers to take advantage of the marketing margin. So the USDA food dollar, over time, the nominal is shown here in blue, and in real dollars it's shown here. And what it shows is, and the scale over here is not set between 0 and 100, it's set between 10 and 20, but it shows basically that the farmers have a lower share of the USDA food dollar. The goal of this program is to allow farmers to apply for some funding. That funding can be used to integrate their farming operation and participate in something called value added on their farm. So to take something they produce as a farmer and add value to it and sell it to consumers or ingredient firms or something like corn ethanol. The U.S. Department of Agricultural Economic Research Service looked at a number of these programs recently and tried to identify job creation and rural entrepreneurship. This figure shows the number of grants per year and the amount of funding provided by Congress. And so the funding is here in yellow, and blue is the number of grants since this is inception. So there's a couple holes here. Part of these were we didn't get appropriation budgets signed on time, and so the money got pushed back on a continuing resolution. So that's not that important. But essentially what we're showing here is that the funding and grant program has been ongoing since the 2001 Farm Bill. 16 states represent 70% of the funding obligations. So these, I'm using two-digit abbreviations here, but if you were to look, for example, in the Midwest, Iowa, Wisconsin, Missouri, Nebraska, Minnesota, Michigan. These are all Midwestern states that have a number of funding. So the Midwest is heavily represented. And again, that's no small surprise because we have agriculture there. California, as we'll see with some of these grants, is number 4 in terms of number of grants. New York State, again, a lot of specialty crops grown in New York. Oregon, Washington State, again, more specialty crops. So we'll see what's happened here over time. Every state and U.S. territory is eligible to apply for this funding. The zip codes, so my student looked at the zip codes and tried to qualify them in terms of the counties. Contrary to what you might think, these are not all rural areas. So a number of the headquarters for the grants are actually in metro areas, and about half are given to recipients who live in a non-metro county zip code, and about half are going to a metro county zip code. As part of the evaluation process, I've been a reviewer on these grants since the inception in 2001. The U.S. Department of Agriculture measures the full business development. And what they mean by that is if you can get through the 9 stages of business development where you actually have a product or service is actually being sold. So this categories here is to have an idea as a farmer, for example, formation of that idea into a written form, such as a business plan, creating a legal organizational structure to house the idea, hiring an employee, seeking outside funding for it, building an asset, a physical facility, using that facility, convert it into product or service, actually selling that product or service to a retail grocer, for example, or in food service. And then, as I said, this is the full business development. So my student tried to categorize all of the grants into one of these 9 categories. The size of the grant varies. Here we see $100,000 is the average, but it sort of resembles a bell-shaped curve, if you will, with some small grants and some large grants given to organizations. There are 4 types of categories that Congress has laid out to receive these funds. The first category is independent producers, which would be like a multi-generational farming family or an individual farmer. A second one, AG groups, it would be an agricultural producer group, such as a commodity organization, such as a Farm Bureau or Farmers Union or Grange or something similar. that's doing this on behalf of farmers in their association. The third category is farmer and rancher cooperatives. So if they're organized in what we call group action as an actual cooperative. And then we have a fourth one called majority controlled producer-based business. A number of state statutes have now changed to allow cooperatives to have non-farmers as members and have equity and voting equity in some cases depending upon the corporation. So in Minnesota, for example, these will be called 308B incorporated cooperatives, which allow for outside investors and for those outside investors to have some voting rights, but not more than 15%. In general, as we're going to see, the majority of these have gone to independent farmers and ranchers and cooperatives over time. There's 4 categories of value-added producers grants that were done in 2001, and later Congress added 2 more categories. By far, the biggest category is differentiation. So can you take that product and change it somehow? For example, taking milk and converting it into organic ice cream or artisan cheese. That would be an example of differentiation. Farmer ranch-based renewable energies, ReNew. These include the corn ethanol factories, many of which are built. Product segregation. So can I take a product such as corn and segregate it into non-genetically modified corn or organic production? So the segregation is SCG. Actual processing, can I take this and build a processing plant to process this particular commodity? And then later Congress had locally grown, and there's a definition for that, and what they call mid-tier value chains. An organization that collects farmers' produce, creates a value chain, and sells that on to consumers. So this mid-tier value chain may not be owned by a cooperative, but the cooperatives have ownership in an entity that's handling this part of the value chain. By far, differentiation comprises the largest share of these particular grants. Renewable energy grants were very common, for example, building corn ethanol plants or soy diesel plants in the early 2000s. But as you can see here over time, those grants have died off significantly since 2008. Dairy, interesting enough, is the largest commodity funded over time. So almost 16% of the grants have gone into dairy production. Another 13% says wine or liquor. The reality is most of these are wine, so setting up some type of vineyard or some type of agricultural tourism linked with a vineyard. Those two comprise almost 30% of all the commodities is how we categorize these. And then fruit and nuts, vegetables, again, specialty crops were very common. Beef, less than 8%. Corn, most of the corn is used for corn ethanol production. And then a number of other categories, as you can see here. So what did we do? What did my students do in his thesis? He created an econometric model designed to estimate the likelihood of achieving full business development of stage 9 with a number of explanatory variables. So could we predict what it took for a farmer to achieve full business development by actually having a product that was being purchased by consumers or retail grocery stores or food service entities? And so the variables were used to try to explain what was going on is, number one, did they receive a grant previously? So they had some experience with the program. And if you did, that led to greater likelihood of having business success. We found that if you were located in a non-metro or metro county, that did not matter. A number of commodities were found to be positively associated with business success. These included aqua, corn, dairy, forestry, fruit and tree nuts, the wine figure. So if you think about these, and the two big ones were dairy and wine, and it's no small surprise, those were found to be positively associated with receiving full business development. Trying to do something with fish farming or aquaculture, forestry, energy or biology, or sugar had a lower probability of receiving the stage 9. So farmers who were producing dairy, fruit, nuts, wheat, and wine all had a higher likelihood of actually producing a product that would be purchased by consumers directly or being sold through a retail grocer or a food service entity. Independent producers, again, were found to have a higher likelihood of achieving Group 9. Similar to other research that's been done in this program, the agricultural producer group did not have as high a likelihood of success. So this is not, as you think about it, this may not be such a big surprise after all, because as a big group such as Farm Bureau or Farmers Union, whoever that group might be, that's doing something on behalf of its members, that's a very broad group of people to try to work on something for. And so typically they provide broad industry knowledge that may or may not be helpful to farmers that are trying to coordinate something. States that had a better likelihood of success: Maryland, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, and Iowa. Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Oregon, they've historically had strong extension programs through the land-grant university in those states for working with producers in what we call business development. Several of these states also had centers that are specifically designed to help organizations. So Minnesota, for example, we have the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, or AURI. Iowa State has a value-added center. Michigan State has an entrepreneurship innovation center. So there are a number of entities in these states that are helping these farmers, and so it stands to reason that they're having some success with these type of organizations. Here are some references that we use for this discussion if you'd like to receive more information on this program.